Welcome to Essential Libertarianism, selected readings from voluntarist.com. Essential Libertarianism is voluntarism. Let's reclaim the anti-political heritage of this philosophy together. The essays and books we read in this show will bring us closer to the state-free voluntary society that we desire. Let's begin the journey.
Living Slavery and All That by Alan P. Koontz. In various forums, at least since the birth of the LP, Murray Rothbard has invoked what he calls the slavery analogy to point up the morality of political voting. The question is, does the slavery analogy really help in this way? To begin with, Rothbard's slavery analogy illustrates the nature of the state. The condition of the slaves relative to their master is more or less the same as that of the subjects to the state. The master, by either directly or indirectly, through a foreman, exceeding his natural rights, denies his slaves natural rights, just as the state denies the natural rights of its subjects by its very existence. The condition of the slaves is thus a given before the question of voting rights arises. Their condition indicates that they have a ruler regardless of whether or not the slaves can vote. The same is true of the subjects of the state. Suppose, then, that the slaves are granted a choice of, say, 2 foremen by the master. The slaves may cast ballots to decide which foreman will execute rule over the slaves. The foreman who receives the most votes will be the choice of all the slaves. Presumably, the slaves will each choose what he or she thinks is the lesser of the 2 evils. The situation of the slave thus becomes analogous to that of the subject who has been granted the right to vote for his ruler. In light of this slavery analogy, Rothbard asks, what is immoral about choosing the lesser of 2 evils, if that is the only choice one has under the circumstances? Voluntarism is perhaps the most important libertarian philosophy, and this podcast is designed to give you a piece of that. But there is a ton of other information out there on the topic of voluntarism. This is why we've compiled an easy list of great voluntarist resources in one location as a one-stop shop for the very best voluntarist content out there. From authors such as Lysander Spooner, Henry David Thoreau, Etienne de la Boétie, Larkin Rose, Carl Watner, Herbert Spencer, and more at essentiallibertarianism.com/books. The best part is that every time you buy something from that list, you help support this show without having to pay a penny extra. So go to essentiallibertarianism.com/books today to start or accelerate your journey to the only non-political, non-violent strategy to achieve a free society and help us delegitimize the state. essentiallibertarianism.com/books. To answer his question, first of all, the choice is one which affects the lives of others besides the chooser. Using the slave analogy, the vote of each slave isn't just a choice of which foreman will rule that slave, but is a choice of who will rule all of the slaves. Thus, each slave that votes is acting in the capacity of the master respecting his slaves. To vote for a foreman is to take part in the process of other people's enslavement. It should be clear, at least to Rothbard, that by voting, the slave in respect to his peers is going as far beyond his or her natural rights as the master or the foreman does respecting his or her slaves. Moreover, the possibility certainly exists in the slavery analogy that not all the slaves may be in agreement as to which of the 2 foremen is the lesser of 2 evils. Most importantly, some or all of the slaves may decide that the lesser of the 2 evils is still evil, and on this basis refuse to vote. In either case, the immorality of voting is quite obvious. It is also obvious that assuming one only has the choice of the lesser or greater of the 2 evils in the slavery analogy is begging the question. As Frank Shadorov once asked in this regard, under what compulsion are we to make such a choice? Why not pass up both of them? Indeed, there is nothing in the slavery analogy that says the slaves must choose one or the other of the 2 foremen. By making such a choice, the slaves are merely doing yet another thing that the master wants them to do. Instead of choosing either foreman, one or more of the slaves may choose neither. This third choice, also open to the slaves, is a moral one, for it doesn't affect coercion toward others, unlike voting. Furthermore, the refusal to vote is a first step toward restoring individual sovereignty. If the slave does what the master wants him or her to do, he or she will surely remain a slave. The master, for example, wouldn't give his or her slaves the right to vote if the slaves could thereby become free. By refusing to vote, the slave is not doing what the master wants him or her to do. If most of the slaves refuse to vote, the master would have to choose the foreman for them. However, the master and foreman would then be up against a group that has refused to barter his or her individual sovereignty for the lesser of the two evils the master had originally offered, let alone give it up for nothing. And so would it be for the state that failed to get barely any of its subjects to participate in the electoral process. In short, the answer to the opening question is no, on the contrary.
Thank you for listening to Essential Libertarianism. You can check out the archives of all of our episodes at essentiallibertarianism.com. And you can subscribe to future episodes on any podcatcher, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, and more. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.